In this video, we are going to be talking about action potentials and how they actually lead to muscular contraction. So an action potential is a change in the membrane of a cell. So most cells have a slightly negative charge on the inside of their membranes. Muscle cells and nerve cells have an action potential or have the potential to change their membrane potentials. And that's what's going on. So we have initially our resting membrane potential, which is slightly negative at negative 90 millivolts in most muscle cells. And it'll remain resting until some sort of signal triggers a change. The stimulus in the case of muscle contraction is acetylcholine binding to the receptors. Recall that acetylcholine binding to the receptors causes the sodium channels to open, and sodium is going to start going inside the cell. Eventually, because sodium is positively charged, it becomes positive and it reaches a point where now you have other sodium channels that are voltage gated, so they're paying attention to the charge on the membrane. They meet this certain level of threshold that causes the voltage gated sodium channels to open. Then you have depolarization. This is happening because sodium is entering into the cell. And this will happen until you reach about 30 millivolts positive. At that point, the voltage-gated sodium channels are going to close and voltage-gated potassium channels will open. This leads to repolarization because the potassium is going to exit the cell. So now the membrane potential is becoming more negative since you're losing the positive charge from the potassium. And then eventually you reach a point where the voltage-gated potassium channels close and another muscle contraction can happen. All right, so let's back up and talk about a motor unit. So the motor unit consists of the neuron. So it's going to be a motor nerve that's serving it. The motor nerve can contain axons and can contain hundreds of them that will innervate the muscle. You have different amounts of motor neurons innervating different types of muscles or amounts of muscles, but axons of the motor nerve can consist of multiple neurons. So a motor unit consists of one motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates. These generally are not clustered together but spread throughout. Therefore, stimulation causes a weak but uniform contraction of the muscle that is being contracted. So the contraction of the muscle will lead to what is known as a muscle twitch. So a muscle twitch is the response of a muscle to a single stimulation. A myogram records a muscle contraction on a single isolated muscles. Muscles contract without shortening, which increases their tension. So we measure tension on the y-axis and look at what's happening on the x-axis over time. So you have your initial stimulus that is going to not really produce any change in tension. This is the latent period. Then eventually over time, because it takes time for cross-bridging to occur and for muscle tension to actually happen, the tension then becomes measurable as calcium is released from the smooth endoplasmic or the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So this is your period of contraction. It's followed by when the cross bridging stops, the calcium is going to return to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this is known as the period of relaxation. So this is a single muscle twitch that we're looking at here. Graded muscle contractions are going to be the amount of muscle that's contracting at different levels. So they can be caused by an increase in the frequency of stimulation can cause a temporal wave summation. So higher frequency, the greater strength of a single motor unit. Increase in the strength of stimulation causes recruitment. So you end up with a stronger stimulation, which recruits more units being activated. The motor units with the smallest muscle fibers are activated first because they're controlled by the smallest motor neurons, but those motor neurons are the most excitable. As motor units with with larger and larger muscle fibers begin to be excited, the contractile strength will be increased. This leads to healthy muscle contractions that are relatively smooth and that vary in strength depending on demands. You can see over here what happens when you recruit the wrong number of muscle fibers for a specific activity. So we have up here Mark Grayson. For those of you that watched the video or the comic inspired series Invincible, he's a superhero who is gaining his superpowers. Suddenly he gains them and he lifts up the bag of garbage. You can see that he's struggling with this first bag, but the second bag is much lighter compared to him. So that's essentially what's happening when you recruit more muscle fibers or more motor units than what you need, and you end up with a disproportionate response. Down here on the bottom, we can see what happens in the opposite case where you recruit fewer motor neurons than what you actually need. So this guy's actually a professional, either bodybuilder or power lifter, and he is pretending to be a janitor, and he has this mop that's like super heavy, and so he gives it to these people that are super strong. They expect it to be a light mop, but because it's super heavy, they're surprised at the amount of weight. They're recruiting less motor units than what they actually need to support this, and so they end up with a disproportionate response. All right, wave, the excitation contraction coupling effects of successive motor neuron signaling is added together, which can lead to a summation. So we have a wave summation. At the bottom of each wave, which is the end of the relaxation phase, this is going to be the stimulus. So here we have the latent phase, contraction, and then relaxation. But before it relaxes all the way, we have another stimulus, and it just keeps on increasing as we go along. So stimulus, another stimulus, going forward. On the right, we have an example of a tetanus. So here we have enough contractions that are happening, or enough stimuli that are happening close enough together that you don't really even get that period of relaxation. So it leads to fused tetanus, which is what we're seeing here. And so the tension remains high until you stop stimulating it, and then it relaxes. Now, muscles do fatigue. So the definition of muscle fatigue is the physiological inability to contract, even though the muscle is still being stimulated. So we can see here on the left, the force is a fresh muscle in blue, and a fatigued muscle in orange. You can see you're not getting as strong of a contraction with it as it is fatigued. This happens before the ATP is completely depleted. So we'll talk about ATP production because it plays a major role in muscle contraction. So even though your ATP is not completely depleted, your muscles fatigue and they essentially can't contract to the level that they were, even though they are still being stimulated. And anyone that's done exercise or any sort of strenuous activity can relate to this. Eventually, you're stimulating your muscles. Let's say you're doing push-ups and you're stimulating your muscles to do a push-up, but eventually your body fails and it can't do any more push-ups, even though you're continuing to stimulate the muscle. So what actually causes muscle fatigue if it's not that the ATP is completely depleted? Ionic imbalances are thought to maybe play a role. Several ionic balances, such as the potassium and the sodium that is moving across the membrane is being lost, and so this is thought to disturb the membrane potential of the muscle cells, also reducing the size of the action potential even though you have the stimulus there. Increased amount of inorganic phosphates. So inorganic phosphate comes from the breakdown of ATP, and this may actually interfere with calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and thus interfere with the release of, or it also may interfere with the release of inorganic phosphate from myosin during ATP or during myosin's power strokes when it's hydrolyzing ATP. Decreased ATP is thought to play a role even though it's not being completely depleted. So low ATP and high magnesium act on voltage sensitive proteins in the T tubule, which help to decrease the calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Decreased glycogen. A decrease in glycogen is highly correlated with muscle fatigue. Many years, lactic acid was thought to play a major role, but the major product of muscle metabolism is not actually lactic acid, but lactate, which does not contribute to pH changes during exercise. So that's not really actually thought to play a major role like it once was. So we've looked at what causes muscle contractions. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about types of muscle contractions. So there's two main types of muscle contractions. One of these is your isotonic contractions. This is going to be the contractions where movement is produced, while the other type of contraction is going to produce, it's going to cause the muscle to contract, but the length is not actually going to change because the load exceeds what the tension can generate. So in isotonic, you can have either concentric or eccentric. In concentric, the muscle is going to shorten. You can see that's what's happening here in the top right. He is lifting weights, so he contracts as he's doing a bicep curl, and that leads to the bicep coming closer to his chest. In eccentric, the muscle is going to lengthen. So this is what happens as he is lowering the weight down after lifting. It's also used for movement and for balance of the body. Isometric, as I mentioned, produces tension but has no shortening or lengthening of the muscle. So you can see over here on the right, the muscle is contracting, but ultimately there's no movement producing because you don't have an overall shortening of the muscle, even though you do have contraction. One thing to note is when it comes to contractions, eccentric contractions have actually been shown to produce the most hypertrophy and contribute significantly to the delayed onset of muscle soreness that oftentimes accompanies a weightlifting session. So, if you want to build some muscle mass, focusing on your eccentric isotonic muscle contractions will be the most beneficial. All right, so this does it for our lesson on muscle contractions. Next video, we will be talking about the types of metabolism that occur during muscle movement and the use of muscles. So I'll see you next time.